Welcome to Bold Agendas, a series of thought leadership podcasts dedicated to the discussion of transformation management. In each podcast, we discuss a topic of strategic interest to business leaders who are guiding their organizations through transformative change. We've seen time and again that the successful execution of contemporary transformational strategies requires a playbook of best practices, including not only governance and oversight in risk management, but also innovative organizational design that aligns to strategy, a proven methodology to bind strategy to execution, and rigorous program management to get from here to there. To do this, we need to understand the glue that binds strategy to execution, enabling coordinated action across an entire organization and effectively creating a line of sight between enterprise project portfolios and business strategy. To that end, I'm privileged to welcome Whynde Kuehn. Whynde is the founder and managing director of S2E, as in strategy to execution, transformation, helping organizations bridge the gap between strategy and execution and achieve their greatest visions for business transformation in a practical and business-focused way. Whynde is a passionate advocate for using business architecture to enable effective strategy execution and digital transformation. She is a longtime business architecture practitioner, educator, a recognized industry thought leader, and community builder, with extensive experience applying the discipline at leading Fortune 500 enterprises and a range of entrepreneurs, not-for-profits, and social initiatives. She's the founder of BizArc Mastery, an online platform offering coaching and resources to simplify business architecture and facilitate its practical usage. She's also a partner at Business Architecture Associates, a senior consultant for Cutter Consortium, and a co-founder of the Business Architecture Guild. In her latest book, entitled The Execution Challenge, Delivering Great Strategy at Scale, co-authored with Brian Cameron, she describes an end-to-end approach that details how to translate strategy into coordinated action across an entire organization. Whynde encourages a complete reevaluation of established practices and advocates a fresh approach to the how of strategy with a focus on execution. This will be an insightful discussion, and I'm grateful to have Whynde here to share her expertise and ideas. I'm Mimi Brooks. I'm the CEO of Logical Design Solutions, a business strategy and transformation consultancy, and I'm a leadership coach. And today we're going to focus on a playbook for strategy to execution. Let's get started. Whynde, so great to see you. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
It is a pleasure and honor, Mimi. I am delighted to be here.
You know, Whynde, I was hoping that we could focus today on your new book, The Execution Challenge. And I'm going to just show it because I have it, I've read it, I've reviewed it, as you know. And if you could see it, it's dog-eared and highlighted all over the book. So that's what my books look like when I care about them. But this is a really interesting book coming out at, I think, a really fortuitous time. So I'm hoping that we can talk through your ideas in the book today. So just so everybody knows what I'm talking about, it's the Execution Challenge, Delivering Great Strategy at Scale. And you did this in collaboration with Brian Cameron from Penn State, from the B School at Penn State, right? So that was exciting. So I thought maybe we could start by just talking about why you all did this. I mean, what brought you together in terms of this idea? Why did you think the timing of this, was really ideal or perfect? And what were you trying to achieve? So let's start with that.
Absolutely. So what brought Brian and I together? Well, first of all, we're really kindred spirits around seeing the possibility for better strategy execution and some of the gaps around it. And also seeing this idea of strategic business architecture, a blueprint, a holistic view of an organization as a key enabler for that. But one of the key catalysts for Brian and I was We did a study with the Graduate Business Curriculum Roundtable a couple of years ago, which revealed that graduate business curriculums in North America do not spend much time teaching students how to execute strategy. And while we teach lots of great things like strategy formulation and leadership and change management, we don't really teach them like the blocking and tackling the steps to execute strategy. So, he and I are very inspired and very passionate to really get these ideas out there. And the why of it all, or the why now, is change, honestly. I think many people will relate to this, right? The volume of change that organizations are dealing with, the pace of change that's coming from technology, disruption, uncertainty, possibility, right? And needing to be able to get ideas into action quickly and well, and be able to have that resilience in a streamlined environment as well.
So, so Whynde, what do you think are the leading causes, or some of the leading causes of ineffective strategy execution today? Like, what are these telltale, situations that you see again and again that explain why we have a problem making this conversion?
Yeah, and I think, a lot has been written about this. And a lot of the factors that you see out there, which are relevant, are things like the strategy maybe was not clear. It was, very high level, or it wasn't communicated. It hasn't made its way throughout the layers of an organization, or, people will point to lack of resources or things like that. But what we see and what we have really tried to address with this book is fragmentation as a major challenge for strategy execution. For example, as we look at the different functions, as we look at the different teams in an organization, listen, it takes a village to get strategy into successful execution quickly and well. And we don't see all of those teams working together hand in hand, end to end, because of things like fragmented accountability, fragmented reporting structures, and even, everybody with their own best, intents, fragmented goals, and different priorities, right? So various teams are also trying to prove their value in different ways and not necessarily all working together hand in hand towards that bigger picture. So fragmentation is a really key one. And that is one of the big things we were trying to bridge.
So Whynde, while the focus of the book is execution, it's not like you're silent on strategy, right? It's not like you're saying, look, strategy is good, most strategy is good, and we're just trying to get the first step into execution. You're also observing some of the shortcomings of strategy, particularly in today's environment. Am I hearing you right about that?
Exactly right. And to be really clear, even though we use the word strategy execution, what we're really talking about is strategy to execution. And that includes, to your point, solid formulation of strategy and informing the strategy with an understanding of what the organization does today, what it's capable of, and any impacts to the organization based on our different strategic directions that we might take, so we can go into everything with eyes wide open.
So, Whynde, you would comment on then in the book things like um, a common condition maybe of employees not understanding the strategy that's being run, right? So we have constituents and some of the problems or gaps with constituents. So people not necessarily understanding, or even at the leadership team, to your point a moment ago, this fragmentation by organizational design or accountability or whatever. But also, right, Whynde, like what we see, which I imagine you see as well, is incongruent strategies, right? So it's not just that they're being developed in silos, it's that they could be redundant in an odd way. They could be inconsistent, or they could really be in conflict. In some way, they actually conflict with each other, because of how strategy has been developed. Does that resonate with you as, what you see as well?
Most certainly, it all resonates. And as I hear you talk about that, there's there's multiple points of reconciliation and alignment.
Yeah.
You're exactly right. One is beyond clarity of strategy and communication. One is, does all of our strategic direction hang together? And while I might want to argue, right, that purely there should be a strategy for the organization, but we have all sorts of things we're trying to do. We have digital or business transformations. We have massive responses to regulatory. We have what are we doing about AI, right? So we have all this direction that, to your point, needs to be reconciled. We also have things like, when direction is set, how do we decide the courses of action to achieve it? Right. So if we have goals around revenue or cost or customer, how do leaders align on how we actually go about achieving that? Because otherwise, that's a big point of divergence. And then, of course, another big reconciliation point is, is the portfolio of work that's executing, is it actually delivering on what we said we needed to do? Right. And one might assume it would, but there are a lot of factors that lead to reasons why it does not always align.
Oh, I think it's a common condition. I really agree with you on that, Whynde. And it seems like when we've run into it, these digital projects might have gotten started ahead of a reconciliation of the strategy to execution, right? And nobody wants to stop the pet project, especially if it sounds like it's an AI project or it sounds like it's an emerging tech project where everybody can be worried about getting behind. So some of these digital initiatives get out of the gate without reconciliation because it looks like, there's just nothing wrong with this. Why would we object to this under any circumstance? And then we find over a period of time that we've got, important spend in the portfolio with questionable value return relative to our priorities.
Exactly. And not to jump ahead or do a spoiler alert, but to your very good point, what we talk about in the book and what we practice is leveraging capabilities as a way to bring those things together so that we can rationalize all those things, all those, like you say, seemingly great ideas that we need to do, but understanding which capabilities are they enabling, and are those capabilities the ones that are most important to us
Yeah.
strategically?
Exactly. So, Wendy, the thing that I really like about the book that I want to make sure that people understand is that it's referred to by some, I think, even in the book itself, as a playbook. But I want to say it's nearly a methodology. And I'll say nearly because I'll let you tell me whether you intended it to be a methodology or not. But there is a lot of rich practices, structured approaches in terms of how to get from here to there. And I want to go into those in just a moment. But the concept that, you're not going to find high level concepts that just kind of run off cliffs here in this book. It brings it all the way around, the circle in terms of best practices for how to do the things that are being recommended, right? So my first question is, did you intend to write a methodology? Is that what you would say this is, or would you refer to it in a different context?
I really appreciate that question. I also appreciate the practicality that you found in the book, because we, as much as we might be steeped in theory, we live the practicality, right? We live these ideas every day. So that's extremely important. Um, but Mimi, I agree. It's a methodology, and it's a methodology to go from strategy to execution, to deliver strategy at a large scale, or it could be a smaller scale for a midsize or even a startup organization, and to be able to do so in a way that is cohesive, right, and actually meets our objectives. So how do we deliver strategy? I agree. It's a methodology. And when I think about what is a methodology, I think there are certain aspects of that that you do find in the book, right? And in our thinking, one is maybe a process. Another would be tools and techniques, and another is maybe a set of principles or best practices. So, in the book, in terms of process, our organizing construct is really these 5 stages from strategy to execution, including a key addition that we've made up front that isn't usually there to bridge the strategy to execution gap. But we do orient around that process. And again, it's not, I don't want to give the impression that it's linear or waterfall or inflexible. It's just right, just big things that we do to get idea into action. So there's a process. Second, in terms of tools and techniques, the key is that, as I said before, strategy execution takes a village. So this is actually putting together many different disciplines and teams and functions. Um, and the tools and techniques that each of them bring, like strategy, like business architecture, like human-centered design or process or organizational change management, to name a few. And then the last is the principles, right? The thought, the ways of thinking and working here are core. They're really at the center. And, they are things like, how do we shift from thinking in silo to doing what's best for the enterprise and the customer? Or how do we lead with business value and context instead of jumping to technology solutions? So, absolutely, I do feel like it is a methodology, and it's our intent for people to be able to practice it and holistically.
You know, I see it too. When I read it, Whynde, I see it as a methodology. In my mind, it read like a methodology because it's a system, right? I mean, to me, what makes it gluey is that it's a logical system construct, and the system itself, to your point, is iterative. So I won't say agile. I'll say agile with a small a. It's iterative. It's fluid, right? It has a value measure piece to it that we'll talk about in just a little bit. I had some questions on that, but it closes the loop, and it creates a sustainability loop as a result of results, lessons learned. So it holds, right? Can hold things like experimentation, for example. It can hold innovation. And it doesn't necessarily mean that everything that we start, we're going to finish on the premise that we started it under.
So well said. And to that point about it being a system and connecting these dots, that's how we're addressing that challenge of fragmentation, right? The challenge that we see in
Yeah.
strategy execution that you asked about earlier. Most certainly. And the other thing when you talk about the iteration, just to emphasize that, because really our organizations are these living organisms. And that's the idea that when strategy or disruption happens, that we can quickly react in the organization to, reprioritize or even reimagine what we are, that you sort of have this fluidity. Exactly right. Or like you said, to be able to make plenty of space for the iteration, or excuse me, the innovation,
Yeah.
right? And the ideas as well.
So if the purpose is strategy to execution, including the step out of strategy, right? The step to get out to get into execution. And we think that the system is a method, if you will, an adoptable method. Maybe we can take a few minutes to talk about some of the foundational elements, the building blocks, if you will, of the system itself, because there's a couple in my mind that are, just set deep into the system and they're relied on, throughout the methodology. And so, if I said that the purpose is strategy to execution, and the system is based on this epicenter idea of strategic business architecture. I mean, that's the label that you've given the what is it? What is the step? How does it work? And then how does it move? How does it bind? How do we measure, et cetera, right? So my question is, why don't we just talk about that for a moment? How do you define strategic business architecture? How do you explain it to people? Because it might not be an intuitive definition to what it is you're trying to hold here.
Absolutely. And it's the term can be misunderstood or unfamiliar, but um so a strategic business architecture is, it's simply a view of an entire organization, right? It's a refreshing, holistic view. It is entirely business focused, and it transcends various silos of organization or product or region. It simply tells us, what does this organization do in order to deliver value to its customers or constituents and to be able to support its operations. And I like to think about it as a blueprint. Blueprints have multiple different views, as does a business architecture. So we have a view of capabilities, like what are the abilities that we have to manage customer information or manage payments or in kind of these building blocks, or what are the value streams, right? What are the flows that help us to deliver value to our customers, constituents, or partners or employees? And it's really the value stream and capability that are these building blocks that we use again and again to design the organization. But the easiest way to understand it, I think, is to think about a blueprint for a home or a building. And it's usually pretty obvious to most of us that before we, start building anything, we want to have a blueprint, right? Because we want to have a common idea in our mind of what this, home or structure is going to look like. That blueprint gives us a way to create a common understanding for all the people involved, first and foremost, the homeowners, but also to activate change. And where a blueprint is also relevant, if we're making changes, like if we are putting an addition onto our home, right? And it's helpful to know what load bearing walls are we touching, or electrical or plumbing. The same holds true for an organization. And as I said earlier, there's so much change, and this helps organizations react to change. So it gives us the blueprint of where is this organization today? What does it look like? What does it need to look like tomorrow to achieve our strategy? And then how are we actually going to get there together? So, blueprint of a business, simply said.
What I want to clarify too for folks, Whynde, is that the value stream building block, is not really, you don't mean that synonymous with what might be referred to as an enterprise value chain, in other words, right? So in some organizations, when we're talking about strategy, they would express, a single value chain for the organization, that tries to say something about what it is that they do that drives value through the enterprise. And I'm making no comment about whether that's a good or bad thing. I'm just saying that's not what you mean by value streams. These are multiple streams by your definition, right? Each one of them trying to provide, it seems to me, this concrete idea of how value is generated. And importantly, I think associated with the value stream is the constituent. So it brings in the stakeholder. For customers, we do this. For workers, we do that. For key business stakeholders, we do this. Right, Whynde? So it really articulates at a more specific level, those value streams that together, if I looked at them as a set, represent, the big ideas of how the organization generates value and for whom.
You could not have said any of that more perfectly, Mimi.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah, and that's a good differentiator from value change, which can be, as you said, useful in strategic decision
Yeah.
making. But we're talking about something different here. You remind me, I also might differentiate and say these aren't, lean value streams either. They're not like all the details of how the work happens either. Like you say, it's the set of things we do to deliver value.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
Yeah. And it establishes, I think, importantly, as we talk about value measures at the end of the discussion, it establishes the relationship of what stakeholders value to the value streams where that's realized, right? So now we start putting stakes in the ground about things that could be measured later, which is really what the system we're talking about, right? So value streams creates a good basis for measurement later too.
Perfectly said. Good basis for measurement and good basis for governance as
Yeah.
well, to understand where we're going and how we're changing. Absolutely.
The other thing too that I liked about the building blocks, and we'll go to capabilities in just a sec, is that in both value streams and capabilities, you take some time to talk about how these ideas also create a shared mental model. I want to say I love that. I think that it's such a big idea when we talk about how do we avoid the inconsistent, redundant, not aligned things that we were talking about before. So the presence of these are kind of naturally cross-functional, and they should be some of the ideas that bind, right? That create the antithesis of stovepipes of value, stovepipes of process, whatever the case might be. Yeah.
Indeed. And I appreciate that you brought that out, right? The common vocabulary, the common mental model. It's hard to even describe how much time I think in a day that we can spend talking past each other. We have different ideas in our mind of what we're talking about or what the business looks like. So Not only does, the capabilities and value streams give us the common mental model, but even building it brings people together
Oh,
because,
good
as you
point.
mentioned, it's cross-functional. So
Yeah.
that's where we come together to really sort of mind meld and say, how do we see this? How do we describe this in our language? Exactly like that.
Yeah, the exercise of formulating these builds the consensus that could otherwise be lacking. Yeah, that makes good sense.
That's right. Oh,
So, if the value streams help us create this mental model of how the organization delivers its value, capabilities are really a nice compatible structure to that, right? So, and we mean business capabilities here, right? So, let you describe those and how then they're different and then how they fit together.
perfect. Because again, I'm glad you're drawing on this because this is the foundation, right? These are our two sets of building blocks. So value streams are these high level stages, as we said, creating value. And capabilities are like reusable pieces, right? They're reusable abilities that one or more value streams is going to use many times. So think about a building block like the ability to manage customer information. We will use those in value streams for, sales or, customers, acquiring products or services. We'll use it in any sort of servicing or, conversations as well as any, ongoing interactions depending on what our industry is. So, these things really help us to transcend organizational and product silos. They give us opportunities to really streamline and harmonize. And from a customer's perspective, right, to be able to show up in ways that are consistent, right, how we deliver the capabilities are consistent, and how we knit them together into an experience can be cohesive. So,
I think it's funny, right, that when we were talking before about, where our weak links can be, it's always amazing to me how many of the gaps or broken links sits in the shared understanding of our what, the shared understanding of our what. And I feel like what we're trying to do here, what you're putting in place as these reusable building blocks on the capabilities side, is trying to create, in the case of capabilities, the building blocks of the what, right? The what is it that we do? And I would think that that stake set deep and its reusability addresses issues like accountability, right? So we can put the who to these what's, right, and clarify some of the accountability problems that again you were pointing to in the beginning. Yeah.
the accountability is a very important point. And so where organizations eventually go with this, if they're oriented around this capability mindset, is even a governance and accountability, as you're saying. And because the capabilities and value streams are cross-functional, that means the governance has to be cross-functional in many cases. So just to go back to my customer example, customer facing capabilities often require a group of the leaders responsible for customer experience to work together and decide what do these capabilities need to look like and do? What investments do we want to make in them? So
Yeah.
most certainly it's a different way to look at accountability. Yeah.
It also gives us the framework that we need to establish governance in the beginning, right? Wendy, not governance at the end. We've got to be so careful about, bringing in old models of change management ideas as the last mile when governance, of a portfolio of projects that have to be negotiated cross functionally, have to be operationalized cross functionally, have to be measured cross functionally, have to be owned cross functionally, even if pieces are owned with clarity. So it gives us that governance at the front end that can really fall apart at the back end, or in a worst case, create requirements that were never considered.
Exactly.
Even worse, right?
Exactly.
So
And
go
yeah,
ahead.
and maybe to your point, it gives us the upfront governance and it gives us a persistent governance, a persistent structure because unless we change our business model, we always have these capabilities. And depending on what we're doing or how things are evolving in the world, we're always enhancing them, right? So they are this persistent construct that we can always go back to.
One other thought here, and then I'll move us to the to some implementation ideas of this is I was doing a white paper on organizational debt recently that we just released. And one of the things that we were saying in the article was that if we can take a more systemic approach in our, business strategy execution, what we could find here, and I think that these building blocks would help us find them, are hidden assets within the organization, assets that could look to some like things that need to be wholly sunset, whole processes sunset. For example, assets that are liabilities as opposed to assets in the future state, value creation. So the idea of discovering hidden assets should be able to be smoked out in this process too, right, Whynde?
100%. And I like that you craft it as organizational debt, not just technical debt, right? Because there's
Big
process
idea.
and there's other aspects of that. These building blocks are that way to find those things and to decide where do we create things that are reusable, right? Where do we have reusable solutions and capability enablement, and where do we people need to have the flexibility to diverge and kind of do their own things. So most definitely. And I will also say that, these building blocks can help us to not only kind of look at our current environment to reduce, right, remediate that debt, but they can also prevent us upfront from investing it in the future. So we can look, right? All right, this capability investment for this initiative, what is it recommending? Is it, planning to create something duplicate, or is it aligned with, where we said we're going?
Yeah, perfect point. So, real quick, Whynde, where does the operating model fit in the structure, that you're proposing here? Because I think a lot of business people might see the strategy to operating model as the direct line. So, how does operating model fit and where does it fit?
That is an extremely important question. I'm glad you asked that. So if we kind of think about strategy and even the overall business model, right? If we make changes to strategy or business model, it flows through the business architecture, right? Those building blocks, the value streams and capabilities are kind of our key points. The and then depending on what we want to change, let's say with our capabilities, that's going to lead to changes in the operating model. So if we think about a capability being enabled by the people, the process, the information and technology, depending on what we want to do with that capability, it targets changes, like I said, in the operating model and more of those details. But there's also, I think, an important point to mention here that an operating model is greater than the sum of its parts, right? It's greater than all the system applications and processes. It's very important set of decisions on how we make, where do we standardize, right? How do we decide we want to shape our operational environment? And that also provides important feedback when we are designing changes to capabilities as well. Like I said earlier, where do we reuse? Where do we, have more flexibility?
So again, strategic business architecture would be gluey, if you will, between, business strategy and the operating model. It kind of sits in between. It negotiates that with understandings and, value and capability priorities, if you will. And then
Yes,
that enables us to impact those ideas to the operating model. Like
perfectly
it fits
said.
like that. Great.
Perfectly said.
So, I want to talk a little bit about the how so that our business leader audience would know what to do with these ideas as we go forward. But just one question as I leave this into that discussion, and that is, um, how do you find that the concepts that we've been talking about here play with business leaders? Like what immediately resonates in terms of your experience? What may take some time to develop in terms of, their understandings here? And how does the concept generally play?
Oh, fantastic question. And I feel quite honored because I've been on this journey for a number of years. And I do either in person or virtually get to interact with a lot of leaders, a lot of people around the world. And I can tell you, I'm just delighted to say the ideas have never resonated as much as they have today. So we'll talk about what resonates and maybe what's a little bit trickier. I think what resonates is regardless of our role, many people see the execution challenges. I've worked with strategy teams that say, we had a great strategy, but we left the course of action to the leaders, and things kind of diverged, right, in execution. Or I actually worked with a government that had set some carbon footprint reduction goals. Everybody decided how to achieve them, and they didn't have an idea of where they were at or where the courses of action conflicting, right? So
Yeah.
that's an example. Or I might work with a portfolio leader that just says, we can't even fund everything that's a priority today. Or as you mentioned earlier, we know pet projects are getting funded, right? So I think people see different aspects of these challenges. So a holistic view and these types of principles, think about the enterprise, those really resonate with people. But I think it coincides with a serious recognition that what got us here won't get us there because of the change, because of the pace. We need to find a way to, change more quickly and be a more resilient organization. In terms, and just even from my own experience too, and Brian will also say, he has a lot more strategic planning people in his classes. We see strategy, transformation, strategic planning teams. They have business architecture, right? They've brought in, so we see a lot of evidence. And I think that the thing that I maybe will say is a little bit more challenging is just initially getting used to the idea of that blueprint, because I think people are so used to seeing fragmented views. They're used to just seeing like their part of the organization, versus looking at it from the bigger picture and the rationalized picture. And there's a leap between, we understand for a home or a building, we need a blueprint, but businesses are these very conceptual things, and we just don't automatically think about that same intentional design. So sometimes that's a little bit of a leap to overcome, and people just have to see it in action.
So, Wendy, we spoke about some of the value of alignment of business people across the organization, the cross-functional business team, if you will. What about the relationship between business and IT? A lot of the historical, gaps and challenges that IT has had with the business and the business has had with IT, really get juiced here as we're dealing with the exponential pace of digital, right? So, how do you think that the approach that you're putting forward here improves the alignment of business to IT?
Well, such a great question. First of all, there's not us and them, there's us and us. And the very view of a business architecture, right? The capabilities, the value streams, they show all the departments, right, in a context. So just to have that one view of this is all of us, right? We all have a part to play in delivering value and supporting operations for this organization. Um, this approach also puts everything in a business context and ties it back to strategy. So even something like digital transformation is about how do we strategically leverage technology? Maybe how do we leverage it to work more efficiently? But all of those things come back to what we're trying to achieve as a business. So it not only bridges business and IT because we understand how the technology supports the business direction and the business, environment and change. But it also puts the business in a different kind of control, a different way to better articulate their needs, that then the technology folks can bring their strongest abilities to find, what are the technologies, what are the solutions to achieve those things. So it's a bridge, it's a language, and it just allows all of us to do what we do best and work together.
Wendy, it seems also that it could get this top down momentum that in the absence tends to come from the bottom up. So when it doesn't work, right, alignment is a problem. But what happens as a result of that alignment can be that IT is looking for business requirements, business requirements. IT is looking for use cases, prioritization of use cases. They could be looking for commentary on business needs as a variable idea of an off the shelf product Just tell us what you want custom from this. Just tell us what you can't use from this, that kind of thing. And so it seems that the action, the motion that happens when that alignment isn't in place, tends to take this kind of seeping up from the bottom. And none of those things, even if done entirely well, are going to give you the sustainability of the strategic perspective from the top down, right? So we can spend a lot of time, money, energy churning these things up from the bottom, asking questions. Is it this? Is it that? Is it this? Is it that?
Exactly, Nini. And I think AI is a good recent example of that. What use cases,
Yeah.
we need to do AI, but it's again, what does the organization need to do? Where can we best leverage it from that top-down perspective? And then letting the technology follow and understanding the impact of that. And I like how you frame this, and also just to say, these capabilities and value streams, they're high level, right? On purpose. So even though it's a top-down look, it's not like it's the forest, it's not the
Yeah.
tree. And even just that allows us for an agility.
Exactly. And we have to, even if we can't immediately see it, we've got to at least conceptualize that that would be a sustainable idea, that the idea that they do fly a level higher than, low level articulated business requirements is because they're trying to be the glue to hold a portfolio of work. I mean, you're talking about something that holds a portfolio, not a single project, right? It holds a portfolio of work and lets us disintermediate and decision, among them, right? So something's gotta be the top, and it's gotta look like a top when it's done, right? So, so let's talk a little bit about execution. So, when you're presenting this to business leaders, it resonates because, to your point, they see some of the pain points, they see what hasn't worked before. There's something credible about, the building blocks that resonate. So, how do they literally adopt the approach? If they say yes, what does the yes involve in terms of their execution?
Yeah, this is key. So methodology is a what, right? But the why is the first big commitment. That's what really underpins it all, because what leaders are really committing to is ways of thinking and working that are a little bit different than today, where we, in earnest, put the enterprise and customer first, balanced with the silos to be able to build that resilience, agility, right, and holistic decision making and strategy execution. So that's really the first thing is you know adopting those principles, adopting that mindset, and being able to articulate and advocate for that in the organization. Why we think enterprise, because that's actually the best thing for this business and for the customer. And sometimes we have to overcome our bias for action, right? To take a conscious pause up front so we can head off these execution challenges downstream that we know happen. So that's really the first thing, is just this understanding of what this means, this mindset, these ways of thinking and working. From there, to put this in practice, because I live and breathe this every day, it's such a human journey. So it's one that unfolds over time. It iterates. It's about trying things and demonstrating value and kind of adapting to what works for an organization. So some steps on that journey. One is to build that business blueprint, those capabilities and value streams. And there's, like you and I were saying before, it's the cross-functional group of business people coming together. So you have that mental model. And then the next step is usually, in a very practical way, it's to start applying that lens to various aspects of strategy execution. Organizations will start by putting a capability lens over their portfolios, just to understand, is what we're funding or planning to fund, is that aligned to strategy? Is there any duplication? Is there any opportunity to connect dots? That's a place to start. Another place to start is to take that holistic blueprint and take a strategy and translate it, right, to bridge that gap. So it's trying it, it's understanding it. And the reason why I say that is, because it's a mindset shift, People need to just see it in action. They need to experience it. It's not about the blueprint. It's about how it gets us to think differently, and that leads the way for more. So other parts then, as the journey unfolds and gets more serious, is to create a strategy to execution process, like the 5 steps that we share in the book. And organizations have parts of that all over, as we said. There's fragmentation, but it's putting it together cohesively with all of the teams and people understanding how they do that together. That process could even, organizations will even take it a step further, and sometimes they'll create common reporting structure for all of these teams, like strategy, like business architecture, like human-centered design, and so on. That's a way to really deepen and make sure this is cohesive. And then from there, it's finding ways to put that governance in place, like we were talking about before, cross-functional governance around the value streams and capabilities. And of course, goes without saying, but I'll say it, the training, the change management, the entire way. The mindset on, translating strategy as a team, right? Not as individuals. And even understanding a business architecture. How do you build that, and how do you really leverage that practice internally?
That makes sense. So what you're basically saying, from initially adopting the way of thinking and working here through the blueprint process that creates, that initial framework, potentially using that to assess the portfolio to determine whether we've got a new view of priority and funding and, what might be the most important thing to us. And then as we look to apply it in new work or to existing work, that's where the methodology piece kind of comes in terms of process. And so, Whynde, the training that you do, that you're involved in, is it in all aspects of this? Would you work with an organization from the adoption of the concept to the development of the initial process that works for them internally?
Absolutely. From the
Okay.
mindset to the process to how all the teams work together individually and together, to the governance. How do you think about governing, to how do you make that leap between strategy and execution? How do you do that translation? And in our book, we unpack some of those steps. And then also a deep dive into how do we build a business architecture and make a practice that thrives to support this work.
As a COE, right,
Yeah,
Whynde, it's like
exactly.
it's a center,
Yep,
it's a center of excellence
there is.
in the organization as a structure, right? Multidisciplinary, et cetera, et cetera. Um, and that's the relationship. Then I wasn't quite sure of this myself, but between the advisory work that you do and the book that you publish, you do advisory against those concepts.
Exactly.
Got it.
Exactly. And the advisory is usually building this muscle, as we're saying, right? And
Yeah.
everything that goes through it. Or it could be applying this muscle, right, to a strategy or transformation. Exactly.
So, Wendy, the last thing that I wanted to cover, because I think that the approach does a particularly good job of closing the loop and creating this value measurement. And I have to say that in our work, we get asked regularly about how digital projects are measured, but it's well after digital projects have started, in particular AI these days and otherwise. And it's really obscure, I think, to business leaders on how to do effective measurement of these initiatives at the end. So a nice thing here is these building blocks in terms of process that also create the building blocks for the value measurement, right? So let me let you kind of talk through the big ideas of value measurement as a way for us to get this around the circle.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you asked about that. In fact, this is Brian's area of research, very deeply into value measurement. So the idea is indeed, as you're sharing, right? It's how do we go beyond the typical ways of measuring things and using the architecture structure for measurement, right? And these metrics, as you're saying, are very precious because they are how leaders keep a pulse on, the work that's executing, and did it actually, not just was it on time, on budget, did it deliver what it was supposed to do to move the needle, right, on the business objectives? So it's adding metrics and looking at things like the capabilities we have, which are most important to us. How do we look at them from a strategic differentiation perspective? Because they're not all equal when we think about where do we invest or what do we outsource, right? So it's also looking at, with capabilities as sort of that anchor. Did an initiative or solution, did it deliver the outcomes it was supposed to against that capability? And in fact, if we think roadmaps, and we think about enhancing a capability, we can look as we go, as we govern, right? To say, we're enhancing capabilities over time, not just at the end, right? It's also very iterative. Or we can look at it from our value stream perspective, either end-to-end value stream or within the stages. What does our value delivery look like from that context? So it's a very relevant scaffolding to really understand what that capability is the key. If this is the strategy and these are the capabilities it needed and this is the changes it needed to them, is it actually doing that in practice? And beyond, maybe one of the things to add, Mimi, beyond just strategy execution, value streams and capabilities give us this scaffolding for metrics that's pretty unique. And it could be cost, right? What is the cost around our capabilities? Or if you think about sustainability, what is our sustainability performance around capabilities? It's not to say that, sustainable, other frameworks and ESG and reporting frameworks aren't important, but this is the context of our business, right? So if we could understand the carbon footprint through our own building blocks, we can connect it to a lot of other things and get some new insights as well.
The other thing that I like about it, Whynde, is that if we have this structure for process and measurement, we can put in these projects of experimentation, and monitor them here. And I think that's such a big idea because, we need to move the concept of failing fast from being a cultural idea to being a way of working. What makes that a way of working? So what does fast mean? Like, how does that intervention happen that creates the insights that have us say, you know what, that's not going to work, but we learned a lot from that, So I think that besides assuming that everything goes across the finish line and then we measure it at the end, it creates a bit of a living measurement system, that we can use to try to operationalize some of these concepts like getting comfortable with failure. The reason failure isn't comfortable is because I have no idea what to do when I'm in the middle of it, and or to recognize it even, So I think that this provides, good how-to on those ideas as well.
Absolutely. Well said. Well
Yeah,
said.
good one. Good one. I
Yeah.
love it. Well,
Yeah.
listen, it's a fun book, and it just came out a couple of months ago, right?
Indeed.
When did it?
July 2024.
End
Yes.
of July. I heard about it through a mutual friend. So that was wonderful. And it led me to you, which was great too.
Yes.
And so I hope that you'll come back. I'd love to hear where you are a year from now. What are customers doing? What are your clients doing? How are we affecting how we're thinking about, the deployment of frontier tech? It's going to be such a
Yes.
huge idea, occupying so much of the executive discussion, boardroom discussion over the next year. So I'd love to have you back to tell us what you learned.
I would love that. We will continue the conversation and really appreciate you, Mimi, and how well you articulate and draw these ideas out in just a very insightful way. So thank you so much for
I
having me.
appreciate that. I love a good methodology, so I'll
Today.
I'll leave it I'll leave it at that.
Awesome.
Okay, I'll look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you again.
Thank you.
See you.